Judges chapter 1. That's where we're going to be working this podcast, Judges 1, if you make your way over there. And after doing an overview of the book, we're ready to go back and start reading these week by week. Chapter 1 is unfortunately incomplete.
That's right. Yeah. I mean,
really 1 and 2 are introductory. And I mention that only because it might be useful actually to read both chapters, even though we're going to end up reading 2 next week.
Really, chapter 3, verse 6. Go all the way to chapter 3, verse 6 is the introduction of the book.
Just to kind of get a whole picture of what's going on.
Well, and you remember, like in any book, what a preface or an introduction does, kind of introduces the topics and the themes, maybe gives you a guide to what's coming, gives you an idea of what you should be looking for, what meaning, what lesson you ought to be getting out of what you're going to read. And so, it's kind of a preview of coming attractions. I mean, and so it's worth, and also setting up, why what happens in the main part of the book happens. Why, in the case of Judges, why is there going to be so many disasters that guys keep delivering them from? Well, this sets up, Israel, at a general level, why Israel is struggling in the land.
Yeah. And the other thing is you do have to kind of pull Joshua through here because Joshua in so many ways sets up what's coming in Judges. We made that point, but especially as it pertains to the mop-up work that had to be done in the land, because that's where 1 is going to pick up. Judges 1 is going to pick up with the mop-up work that had to be done in the land. Now, there are a couple of things I marked in my Bible you might want to mark as you're going through chapters 1 and 2. One of the things that I marked is how the lesson of Joshua at some level continued to be applied early in Judges. For example, in chapter 1 and verse 4, Judah went up and the Lord gave the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hands.
Right.
And they defeated 10,000 men from Bezek. And so the mop-up work wasn't completely neglected. And when they did what God told them to do, everything worked according to plan.
Right.
And several times you'll see that in chapter 1. So it's not like this was another, you get to the end of Joshua and all of a sudden, they just stop.
Right.
So some of that work is done, and that's one thing I would note as I go through my reading.
Well, and really, again, if this, these introductory chapters are setting up ideas and themes, and what you should be looking for, what should you be learning from the book, and why, when the story slows down, we go into details, individual judges and their adventures and so forth. Why are we in this situation? Setting all that up. One of the things to notice in chapter 1 as well is how the language shifts, though, as it starts going tribe by tribe. Starts with Judah, but as it goes tribe by tribe through their now release, the conquest is over. They control the region. Now each tribe is released to go do mop-up within the villages and the smaller cities that are left in their own territories and go do the mop-up.
So responsibility is spread out.
Yeah, it's
instead of being centralized under Joshua.
Right.
Now everyone's going to have to be responsible for their turf.
Right. That's exactly right. Now go clean up what's left. The major choke points, the major cities, the major fortifications of the land have been dealt with collectively by the United Israelite Army. Now go control your region with what's left of the Canaanites. So again, the Canaanites are not gone. You got to deal with them. But what happens as you read this chapter, and this is really, really important, this is one of those read carefully, read slowly. You think you know the story, watch the language because the details matter. It starts very strong and well with Judah, and the Lord is with them, and they vanquish. Toes and thumbs are cut off. It's as a sign of just their domination. But as we go on, you'll notice first that that the people, and again, depends on which tribe we're talking about in the story, but there's a progression in general. We go from basically conquering and taking out to keeping some among them for forced labor or slavery, because free labor. Why kill what you can use? To just letting them go, to allowing them to live among them, and the language shifts at one point to now is a tribe lives among the Canaanites, to at the end of the progression, the tribe of Dan gets driven out of its allotment by the Canaanites, which is why they go north.
Right. And so I think that's the second thing to mark.
Yeah.
As you go through and read, mark these places. I mean, the first one I see is in 1 and 19. Now the Lord was with Judah, and they took possession of the hill country, but they did not drive out the inhabitants of the valley because they had iron chariots. And so I'm assuming either there was an intimidation factor or whatever concern. We're not going to be able to deal with these people because they got weapons we don't have, something to that effect.
Right.
But go through and start marking those places where it says, yeah, but they didn't finish the job here.
Right.
And there are way more examples of we didn't finish the job
Right.
than there are of we were faithful and did what we were supposed
Well,
to.
and to your point, even the way that works, yeah, the Iron Chariots, that's cutting edge military technology back in this time. Iron, we were moving in archaeologically speaking, we're moving from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age at this time. So iron is a cutting edge military metal. It's like having F-22s that we still won't export even to our allies. They're so cutting edge. And so there is an intimidation factor, but part of what's meant to be seen is not that they couldn't defeat the Canaanites because of the Iron Chariots. Because ironically, when we read the story of Deborah and Barak, they overcome Canaanites with chariots in the north. So the issue is not the chariots, the issue is the people. And the way we're shown it as well is the very next verse, but in Hebron with Caleb, he takes out the sons of Anak. And for those of you keeping score at home, the sons of Anak are giants. Remember back in the book of Numbers, the faithless spies, we can't take the land because among other things, there are giants there. And here's Caleb, old man, taking out giants. He's been waiting decades for the opportunity to do so because he's the guy back in Numbers saying we can do it. An old man can take out the giants, but collectively they can't handle the Iron Chariots. And why put those details next to each other? The issue is not God, the issue is the people.
Well, and I do think that contrast plays out in chapter 1.
Yeah.
Because you have these examples of we did what God said and we were successful. And yet here they're not doing what God said, and as a result, they don't obey the command to finish up these mop-up operations. So I think those two things are said beside each other. If you kind of go through and mark them in your Bible, I mark them in different colors so they kind of stand all on the page, and you can contrast them to each other. And then the third thing I marked is exactly what you're talking about. So in 21, so the Jebusites lived with the sons of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day.
Right.
And you start going through, and it says that over and over and over again, and even again into chapter 2, as you were saying, don't stop looking for it because it goes on through, and they didn't finish the job, and so these people continued to be among them, and then as we get into chapter 2, the ultimate consequence is they begin to be influenced and embrace idolatry.
Right. Well, and especially, really chapter 1 ends with chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. Chapter 2, 6 starts another way of getting the dynamic of the book of Judges. 2, 1 through 5 is really the end of chapter 21. And that's where it goes and it makes sense. And God says, you've not obeyed my voice. What is this you've done? Because now, they're living, literally by the end of chapter 1, they live among the Canaanites. Now the Canaanites are driving them out of their, and remember, God allotted these territories to them. It's like literally God says to Dan, I give you this land. And then because of Dan's spiritual condition and faithlessness, the Canaanites are now pushing the Danites out of the land God gave them. Right. And so, man, there's a really shocking moment.
Yeah, and with that contrast there, where you see they are successful when they do what he says, it's a reminder that God is still with them.
Yeah.
This is totally in their court.
This is doable.
It's not like God was done and said, I've been working with you guys for a long time. I'm going to take some time off.
Yeah, you got it from here.
He's still ready, and in some cases does help them finish. They just completely dropped the ball.
Yeah.
And so that's set up, I think, rather dramatically in chapter 1 because it isn't just like God says it's happened. There's actually this record of it happened here, and it happened here, and it happened here, and it happened here, over and over and over again, until you wind up with all these pockets of Canaanites.
Yeah. And I think, Dave, one of the things that, again, as we're reading this and then thinking about how it applies today, the spiritual life today for Christians, it is very easy to go so far in pushing back on the world and worldliness and sin in our lives and then tolerate some pockets where it's just too hard or too time-consuming to deal with this pet sin, this pet issue. We justify our anger with, well, that's just my personality, whatever it is. And spiritually speaking, it's tolerating the Canaanites among, within me again. I don't want to finish the job of pursuing holiness, of driving out what needs to be driven out of my life, my family's life, my congregation's life. It's just easier to say we've gone this far. We're basically where we need to be. I will tolerate these villages, this city. The Jebusites can stay in Jerusalem. It's just too much trouble to go deal with it.
And how about the number of Christians? Let's make it, just very parallel to what's happening here in chapter 1, whose closest associates are in the world.
Yeah.
And that's the problem here. They're interacting with these people every day. They're seeing and learning about and getting connected with their religious practices until they wind up doing it themselves.
Right.
And I know we have a mission to the world, which requires at some level interaction with the world. And I'm not taking anything away from that. But at the very same time, there's also intended to be this distance between us and the world. And I would cite as an example of that, if your best friends in the world, people you hang out with and choose to be with, are not people that share your same view of the world spiritually, I think you're picking the wrong crowd.
Right.
And you're going to run into exactly the kind of problem that you see here. When you get into a crisis with your children, when you get in crisis morally or ethically, when you get a crisis in your marriage, who's in your ear?
Right.
Who are you talking to? People are going to keep calling you back to God?
Right. People who, because they share your moral commitments and your covenantal commitments, are going to encourage you to suffer righteously in God's way, versus those who are going to offer you worldly solutions of just protect yourself, save yourself, look out for yourself first.
Yeah. And that's exactly what's going on here.
Right.
The reason they're driving them out is because God says, I want them away from you so they don't get in you.
Well, that's right. And we'll see that even more in chapter 2 next week. And so we're going to read chapter 2 next week. And by the way, all this is in Deuteronomy. In one sense, part of what's, these early chapters are really them violating the warnings that, not just from Joshua, but go back to Moses and Deuteronomy about don't live among the Canaanites. Don't intermarry the Canaanites. Don't worship their gods. When you're among them, don't look at what they're doing and say, I like that, let me do that too, even if I do it towards God. Moses had warned them. They have a book of the law that says all of this. And yet what's happening in the book of Judges, especially these early chapters, is just basically what we could read in a nutshell is, and they broke Deuteronomy. They violated Deuteronomy.
Yeah, that is exactly right. I hear a little Genesis in chapter 2 and verse 2 as well. What is this you have done?
Yeah.
Sounds a little Adam and Eve-ish,
yeah,
right? From chapter 3,
well,
same kind of thing.
Well, and again, we talk about sometimes, Bible's just a handful of big ideas, like a symphony with themes and variations. Just this is the fall. If Joshua was Joshua's creation and putting them into the land, putting them into paradise. And as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And it ends on a very high note and very good, good spiritual condition. It's not Jesus in perfection yet, but Old Testament wise. And so that's the thing. Joshua and Judges are two sides. Judges is the story of the fall and the spread of, just like Genesis after the fall, the spread of sin from Cain to the daughters of men and the sons of God to the flood. It's the same thing, because Judges is not just the story we learn, the way we learn it sometimes when we're younger, a cycle. It's like a wheel turning. No, it's a downward spiral. It goes around, but it goes down each time the wheel spins.
Right.
And so just like you see in Genesis, where once the fall happens, it's not just that we fell, sin gets worse and worse and worse until, per your Genesis echo, by the end of the book of Judges, we have a very dark story that is intentionally shaped to sound like Sodom and Gomorrah again.
Right. That's exactly right.
That's how far we've gone. That's how bad it's gotten.
I do think the Bible stories kind of play with these same basic themes and ideas over and over.
Yeah,
and over
once you know it's there, you begin to kind of see it all over. You don't want to overdo it, but there is these same basic dynamics. God blesses, God creates, God provides, God protects, God puts you in paradise, and we make the wrong choice again, and it always comes back to faithlessness from God. We just don't do what He says, and then literally this all breaks loose.
So I think it's a great opportunity as we move into Judges. I know there were some Joshua segments where we're doing a lot of lists and hard to find relevant stuff for the kids. Some of y'all talk to me about that, and I get that. That's going to be, no matter where we're reading in the Bible, we're going to have that struggle in places. This is a place where you can talk to your kids. Because the peer group, the crowd,
especially your teenagers,
the crowd. Well, but think about getting that set in the mind of a third and fourth grader.
Oh yeah, about
who's around you and who you're going to be close to. I think it's a great opportunity to talk to your kids, and I hope you'll do that about the danger of surrounding yourself with people that aren't pulling in the same direction you are. So, great opportunities working Joshua chapter 1 this week.